At this point, you guys probably know that I am a French defense player, and one of the things that I hate the most when I play the French defense as black is to face the advanced variation. And whether you like it or not, there's always a variation in the openings you play that you might not like, and it might be very common, such as the advanced variation is very common in the French defense. But you should never stop experimenting new variations and new sidelines, and that's why I tried in many other ways to play against this advanced variation, and I found a very simple and sound strategy that I'm going to share with you guys today. But before we begin, if you are not subscribed to the channel yet, I recommend you clicking the button down below and subscribing to the channel for more, because I post videos pretty much every day here giving chess tips for improvement. But let's jump right into it. So French defense, your opponent is going to play e4 and you respond by playing e6. We are in the French defense territory here, and this is one of my favorite defenses against e4. And against d4 I play d5, and the worst variation to me is the advance. I like when my opponents take and we go into the exchange variation, or whenever they play like Tarrasch or any other variations, classical or whatever. I really like taking the pawn here, so I'm pretty comfortable in those lines. But one of the most common lines in the French defense for white is when they push the pawn to e5, and this is the advanced variation. And this is the most annoying one because in most cases we just push this pawn and white responds by playing here, and then we have that development with the knight here, queen here, and we try to play against this pawn here. But I feel like I'm lacking space. It's hard to develop this knight here because the pawn is taking away too much space and it's super closed. So I struggled a lot against this variation for a long time. But recently I found this sideline that is very interesting in the French advanced variation. That's why we should always experiment new variations until we find something we are comfortable with. And I found this one, and this is pretty comfortable to me, and I've been playing this recently. And the idea is, the weakness of the French defense is this French bishop, the light squared bishop. So if we manage to trade this very weak bishop here, because it is blocked, you know, by the pawn chain, we know that this pawn is blocking the bishop. If we manage to trade this bishop by this bishop, that might be a really good idea, right? So if we do that, we solve the most famous or infamous weakness of the French defense, which is this light squared bishop. So what we're going to do is we're going to start by playing this move c5, which is very typical within the French. And as our opponent responds by playing c3, the most common move, we're not going to play the typical line where we just play the knight here. We're going to play knight e7. So we're going to place this knight here and then move it here, where it's going to be occupying this square. Funny, right? Yeah, not the typical line. Your opponent's probably going to play knight f3, and you play knight e to c6. Not this knight here on the b square. We're not going to play this one. We're going to play the other knight here. And you might be asking yourself, hey, Victor, like I could have played this knight here if I wanted a knight on this square. But I wasted like 2 moves to bring the other knight to the other side of the board. Yes, but there's a reason why we need this knight here, and you're going to see it very soon. So the idea here is we're going to play this move, push this pawn, bring this bishop over here so we can trade it with the light squared bishop of white. So more common, we might see this move here. We're going to check this out. This is trying to ruin our plans, such as we can't play this move and this move because they're going to push the pawn over here. So we're going to see what happens when white plays this move, but the most common move here is to just develop the bishop to d3, preparing to castle. And here we're going to follow up with our plan of playing b6. And let's say white castles here. We're just going to play bishop to a6. And now the trade is pretty much unavoidable because this bishop is aiming at the rook on the other side. So the best bet for white here is to just trade the bishops. And we are eliminating our weakest piece for white's strong bishop, you know. This bishop is not on the squares of the pawns, so this bishop for white is actually pretty good. And our bishop is actually not so good, so we trade it. And that's why we need this knight here, because it can capture back, right? So now we are capturing back with our knight. And the most challenging move here that white can play is this move queen to a4, which is pinning our knight here to the king and also hitting this knight in the corner. So we have to do something about this knight because it is dropping, and if white takes it, it's another fork, so this is terrible. So what we're going to do is we're going to move it back. As we move this knight back, it is defending this knight, and this queen is simply misplaced here. So bishop to e3 is the most commonly played move here, and now we can play queen to d7, setting up a little trap here, because this is a typical trap, a typical tactic that happens within the French. Normally the bishop is here, and this discovered attack happens a lot while we hit white's bishop or queen in this case. And if white is not aware and they play something like, for example, knight b to d2, which is a very typical move, believe it or not, we can go ahead and snatch that pawn from the center, and white has no choice but to trade queens, and then you take it back and you were up a pawn, right? If white ever goes back, you just go back with your knight or trade it for the other knight, and you are up a pawn anyway. So if white's not careful, they might end up losing this queen. This might happen. Maybe they, I don't know, take here. You can just go ahead and grab the queen for free. So takes is the best option. We take back with the knight goes backwards, and we are up a pawn, a clear pawn. So if they take, we just take back, and we see a few moves ahead here, but not a big deal. We can just keep developing our pieces, develop the knight, the bishop, and pretty good game here. You can even castle if you want, or just push the king and bring the rooks. Pretty much easy game here. But if your opponent is aware, instead of playing, any other moves like knight here, they're going to take away this queen from this very awkward square and this kind of X-ray that is happening here. So they're going to play something like queen to d1. And after that, we can simply develop the bishop to e7, preparing to castle. And this is a pretty good game for us. Okay, so this is the typical line that we're going to play. Okay, so we traded our weak bishop for white's light square bishop that was here. And now we have a very much equal game, and white has to prove the advantage now because we eliminated our weakness. Now white has to prove the advantage. So what happens if something else happens in this situation? We are here trying to prepare our moves and trade our bishop. So one thing that white can do is try to frustrate our plans by playing a3. And the idea here is that if we play this, white has this move, and suddenly it's not so simple for us to develop our bishop over here and try to trade it because, these pawns are advancing on the queen side. So what we can do here in this case is to play a5. And as we do that, we are preparing to put our bishop over here after pushing this pawn, of course. So it's going to be unavoidable, and the trade will happen no matter what. So no matter what white does here, let's say they play bishop to d3, you just play b6, and now you're ready to bring your bishop here, defended by the rook and the knight, and then you can take white's bishop. If they castle, you just play bishop to a6, and after it takes, you end up trading the weak bishop for white's light squared bishop. If they go for a different move here, for example, you play a5, and they go for b4, for example, anyway, trying to prevent us from doing this, it's not going to work. We just take the pawn, and after c takes, we take with the knight. And here, white cannot take back because the rook is dropping. So this is another way to address this. And if white pushes, for example, a4 after a5, we can simply play b6 and nothing changes. We're just going to bring our bishop here, and after takes, we traded our bishop no matter what. So the trade is going to be unavoidable, and if white tries to do something to stop it, you know what to do, right? You just push your pawn here to a5, and there's nothing that white can do to prevent this trade. You are going to play b6 and bring your bishop here to a6 and trade it no matter what white does. Okay, so there's not much they can do here in this position. They're going to have to take, you know, the pawn, the bishop, and that's gonna be good for you. Okay. So that's pretty much it for this variation. That's why I like it so much, because it's impossible for white to avoid the trade here. So no matter what they do, if they, you know, follow just the typical moves here, you're going to do that anyway. Well, that's another line that they can go for. Maybe playing queen e2 to prevent the trade here. It's not going to happen anyway, because again, you can play a5, and now you have knight and rook protecting this square. So there's not much that white can do. If they play a4, you just play bishop to a6, and there's not much that white can do. If they take, you just take back, and you traded the bishop. If they don't take and they go for, like, let's say bishop to b5 here, then you can go ahead and take the bishop. As they take back with the pawn, you just move the knight away, and it's pretty good for you as well. Okay, so that's pretty much it. I really like this variation. There's not much white can do. They have to trade. So as you play this move, there's not much they can do. They will have to trade your weak bishop for their strong bishop, and this is going to make the advanced variation for black much more interesting, and white will have to prove the advantage. Guys, if you liked this video, remember to like and subscribe for more, and as always, I see you guys in the next one.